I stood alone in my kitchen during Harold's funeral reception, still wearing my black dress, when I heard Crystal's voice through the pantry door. She was on her phone in the hallway, speaking to someone. The old bat is finally alone now. Harold's gone, so nothing's stopping us. I'll have Thomas convinced within a week. Speed up the inheritance process and get her into Shady Pines before she knows what hit her. My hands shook as I gripped the counter. Crystal had no idea that Harold had added a special clause about her into the will just 2 weeks before his death. 3 days passed after the funeral, in a blur of grief and confusion. I kept replaying Crystal's words in my mind, wondering if I had somehow misheard her. Maybe the stress of losing Harold after 45 years of marriage had affected me more than I realized. Maybe I was imagining threats where none existed, but her voice had been so clear, so cold, so calculating. When attorney Patricia Hammond called to schedule the will reading, my heart started racing. I hadn't told anyone what I had overheard. Part of me wanted to believe I had been mistaken, that my daughter-in-law couldn't possibly be plotting against me. Crystal had always seemed ambitious and a bit superficial, but evil? I wasn't sure. Thomas called that evening to check on me. My son's voice was warm and concerned, asking how I was holding up, whether I needed anything. He sounded genuinely worried about me. It made me doubt what I had heard even more. How could Thomas's wife be plotting to institutionalize me while my son was being so caring? The day of the will reading arrived faster than I expected. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit, one Harold had always liked. My hands trembled as I buttoned the jacket. At 67 years old, I had never imagined I would be facing a situation like this. Harold and I had built a good life together. We had raised Thomas, saved money, bought a modest but comfortable home in suburban Connecticut. Everything was supposed to be settled and peaceful in these years. Attorney Patricia Hammond's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown. The waiting room smelled like coffee and old paper. When the receptionist called us back, I walked into the conference room to find Thomas and Crystal already seated at the large wooden table. Thomas stood immediately and hugged me. He was 38 years old now, tall and lean like his father had been. Crystal remained seated, offering me a tight smile. She was 34, with carefully highlighted blonde hair and perfectly applied makeup. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Patricia Hammond was a woman in her mid-50s, with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. She had handled Harold's legal affairs for over 20 years. She shook my hand firmly, expressed her condolences again, and then opened a leather folder on the table. The reading of the will began with standard legal language. Then Patricia got to the specifics. Harold's estate wasn't enormous, but it was substantial. The house, which we had paid off 15 years ago, was worth approximately $400,000. We had savings of about $150,000. Harold's life insurance policy would pay out $300,000. Patricia read carefully. The house goes to Arabella for her lifetime. It cannot be sold or transferred while she lives. Upon her death, it will pass to Thomas. The savings will be split 60% to Arabella, 40% to Thomas. The life insurance proceeds go entirely to Thomas. I watched Crystal's face. She was doing mental calculations, I could tell. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly on the edge of the table. Then Patricia read the clause that changed everything. She cleared her throat, and her tone became more serious. There is a special provision that Harold added to this will 2 weeks before his death. Should my son, Thomas, or his wife, Crystal, attempt to institutionalize my wife, Arabella, against her will or without genuine medical necessity, or should they pressure her to relinquish her home or assets, Thomas's inheritance shall be reduced to $1. All remaining assets will go to charitable organizations of Arabella's choosing. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Crystal's face went white, then flushed red. Thomas looked completely bewildered, turning to look at his wife, and then at me. "Why would Dad write something like that?" Thomas asked, his voice confused and hurt. He looked at Patricia. Did he think we would do something to hurt Mom? Patricia folded her hands on the table. Harold came to see me alone 2 weeks before his death. He insisted on adding this clause. He seemed worried, but wouldn't give me specific details. He just said he wanted to make sure Arabella would be protected. Crystal recovered quickly. I had to give her credit for that. She put her hand on her chest, her eyes wide. That's so hurtful. Why would Harold think we would ever do anything like that? Arabella is family. We love her. Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard her on the phone at the funeral, I might have believed her myself. But I had heard her. And now I understood. Harold had suspected something too. He had tried to protect me. The meeting concluded shortly after. Patricia gave me copies of all the documents and told me to call if I had any questions. As we walked out to the parking lot, Thomas went ahead to get the car. Crystal grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. She pulled me aside, her face close to mine. The sweet, concerned expression was gone, replaced by cold fury. You told him something, didn't you? You poisoned him against me. I pulled my arm free. Harold never mentioned anything to me about the will. I didn't know about that clause until today. Crystal's eyes narrowed. That clause means nothing. In 6 months, you'll be begging us to put you somewhere safe. You can't manage that house alone. You can't manage anything alone. She walked away just as Thomas pulled up in his car. By the time he got out, Crystal's smile was back in place, warm and loving. She linked her arm through his. That evening, they came to my house with dinner. Crystal had brought lasagna from an expensive Italian restaurant, acting concerned and helpful. During the meal, she casually mentioned that I had called her 5 times that afternoon. I set down my fork. I didn't call you at all today. Crystal pulled out her phone, showing me the screen. 5 missed calls from my number, with timestamps clearly visible. Thomas leaned over to look, his forehead creasing with worry. Mom, are you sure you didn't call? Maybe you hit the button by accident? I know I didn't call. I was here all afternoon, going through some of Harold's things. I didn't use my phone once, but the evidence was right there on Crystal's screen. Thomas looked at me with concern. Crystal touched his hand gently, her voice soft. It's okay, she's been through so much. It's understandable to be confused. After they left, I went looking for my cell phone. I found it in the living room, on the side table by the couch. I had left it in the kitchen that morning. Someone had moved it. Someone had used it. The next morning, I went to the grocery store. When I tried to pay for my items, my credit card was declined. Embarrassed, I tried another card. Also declined. The cashier looked uncomfortable as I fumbled through my wallet. I ended up leaving the groceries there and driving straight to the bank. The bank manager pulled up my accounts on her computer screen. Mrs. Patterson, it looks like you have several overdrawn accounts. There have been numerous online purchases in the last 48 hours, totaling approximately $1,500. I felt dizzy. I didn't make any online purchases. She turned the screen so I could see. Electronics, clothing, gift cards, all ordered to various addresses I didn't recognize. I had to cancel all my cards, file fraud reports, and start the process of disputing the charges. It took 3 hours. When I got home, Crystal called. Thomas told me about your money troubles. This is exactly what we were worried about. You're getting confused, making mistakes with your accounts. I'm not confused. Someone stole my information and made fraudulent purchases. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Of course, that's what you think. But Mom, these things happen when people start having memory issues. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I hung up on her. My hands were shaking. She was doing this. I knew she was doing this. But how could I prove it? 2 weeks passed, and the attacks escalated. My phone service was mysteriously canceled. I drove to the phone store, where a very confused employee showed me a recording of someone who sounded exactly like me calling to cancel the service. The voice was mine, but I had never made that call. I realized Crystal must be using some kind of voice manipulation technology. I got my service restored, but the damage was done. Thomas received a call from the phone company about my concerning behavior, asking if I was all right. Then I started missing appointments I never knew I had. My doctor's office called, annoyed that I had missed an important checkup, but I had never scheduled an appointment. They insisted I had called twice to confirm it. My blood pressure medication didn't arrive when it should have. When I called the pharmacy, they told me my prescriptions had been transferred to a different location across town. I never authorized that transfer. When I went to the post office to check on other missing mail, they showed me an address change form with my signature on it. The signature looked like mine, but I had never filled out that form. I had to file an identity theft report with the police. The officer who took my statement was polite but skeptical. He clearly thought I was a confused elderly woman who had simply forgotten things. Thomas visited that evening, his face lined with worry. "Mom, Crystal has been telling me about some incidents. The phone calls, the money problems, the missed appointments. I'm concerned about you." I tried to tell him what I had overheard at the funeral. I explained about Crystal's phone conversation, her plot to get me into a nursing home. Thomas's expression shifted from concern to something that looked like pity mixed with frustration. "Mom, that sounds paranoid. Crystal loves you. She's been nothing but supportive. I think the stress of losing Dad is affecting you more than you realize." "I'm not paranoid. She's manipulating everything." Thomas left looking troubled. I could see him pulling away from me, starting to believe his wife over his own mother. The next incident was worse. Crystal arrived unexpectedly the following afternoon with Thomas. She was carrying a casserole, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law perfectly. I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted her directly, my voice rising. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to make everyone think I'm losing my mind. You're stealing my mail, canceling my services, making fraudulent charges on my accounts." Crystal's eyes went wide with shock and hurt. "Mother Arabella, why would you think such awful things about me?" "Because I heard you on the phone at the funeral. You said you were going to put me in Shady Pines and take my house." Thomas stepped between us. "Mom, stop. This is getting out of hand." 2 days later, Crystal played a recording for Thomas. I know this because Thomas came to my house, his face grave, and played it for me on his phone. It was my voice, talking to Harold as if he were still alive. "I wish you were here, Harold. I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart. Why did you leave me alone?" But the way it was edited, it sounded like I thought Harold was actually in the room with me, like I was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. In reality, that recording was from when I had been crying alone in my bedroom one night, talking to Harold's photograph. Crystal must have been recording me somehow. She had edited out all the context, making it sound like I had dementia. Thomas listened to that recording with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I think you need to see someone, a doctor, maybe a therapist." My social isolation was becoming complete. I tried to call my sister Rachel in Arizona, but the number was disconnected. I tried to email her, but my emails bounced back. I later found out that Crystal had been contacting my friends and family, telling them I was going through a difficult time and needed space, that I was saying strange things, and that contact with people might confuse me more. Crystal had somehow changed the contact information in my phone. Numbers I thought were for my friends actually went to numbers Crystal controlled, or to disconnected lines. My bridge club friends stopped returning my calls. When I drove to Eleanor's house next door, she was cold and distant, saying she had heard I was dealing with some health issues, and maybe I should focus on getting better before socializing. Crystal had gotten to her too. I felt completely alone, trapped in my own life, while Crystal systematically destroyed my credibility and isolated me from everyone who might help. Then the financial pressure intensified. A property tax bill arrived showing my taxes had doubled due to a reassessment. When I called the county office, they showed me paperwork I had never filed requesting a reassessment. Crystal must have forged documents. My home insurance was suddenly canceled due to non-payment. I never received the bills because Crystal had been intercepting my mail. By the time I found out, I had to scramble to get new insurance, which cost more because there had been a lapse in coverage. Every day brought a new crisis. Every time I solved one problem, two more appeared. I was drowning in issues I couldn't fix fast enough. Crystal's strategy was working perfectly. Attorney Patricia Hammond tried to call me several times, but I didn't know because Crystal had set up call forwarding on my phone. Patricia's calls were going to a voicemail I couldn't access. Patricia had something important to tell me about the will, but the message never reached me. I was exhausted, frightened, and increasingly desperate. Crystal was a step ahead of me at every turn, and my own son believed her instead of me. 3 weeks after the will reading, disaster struck in the middle of the night. I woke to the smell of smoke and the blaring of my fire alarm. Flames were coming from my kitchen. I grabbed my phone and ran outside in my nightgown, calling 911. The fire department arrived within minutes. They got the fire out before it spread beyond the kitchen, but the damage was extensive. Smoke had filled the entire house. The fire investigator said it appeared to be faulty wiring in the stove. I stood on my front lawn at 2 a.m, wrapped in a blanket a firefighter had given me, watching as they cleared my house. I knew this wasn't an accident. Crystal had done this somehow. But the investigator found nothing suspicious. Later, I would learn she had paid him off, but in that moment, I had no proof. My house was uninhabitable. The smoke damage was throughout. Repairs would take at least 6 weeks. My insurance would cover it, but the process would take time. Thomas arrived within an hour of my call. He wrapped his arms around me, and I let myself lean against my son for just a moment. "Mom, you can't stay here. Come stay with Crystal and me. We have the guest room." I wanted to refuse, but where else could I go? I had no accessible money because my accounts were still frozen from the fraud. Hotels required credit cards. My friends and family had all been turned against me. I had no choice. I'm sure you can understand how that felt. To be forced into the home of the person who was destroying your life. The first few days at Thomas and Crystal's house, Crystal played her role perfectly. She was gracious, concerned, helpful. She insisted on making all my meals. "Let me take care of you. You've been through so much stress." But I saw the calculation in her eyes when Thomas wasn't looking. I was exactly where she wanted me. Within 3 days of eating the meals Crystal prepared, I started feeling strange. Foggy, tired, dizzy. My thoughts felt scattered. I would start to do something and forget what I was doing halfway through. Crystal expressed concern to Thomas. "I'm really worried about her. She seems more confused every day." She insisted I see a doctor. "I know just the right specialist. Dr. Stephen Walsh is the best geriatric doctor in the area." The appointment was scheduled immediately. Dr. Walsh's office was in a professional building downtown. He was a man in his late 40s with graying hair and an expensive suit. He spoke softly, asking me questions about my memory, my daily activities, my emotional state. Thomas came with me to the appointment. Dr. Walsh ran tests, or claimed to. Later, I would learn the results were fabricated. He told me I had early onset cognitive decline. The words hit me like a physical blow. I protested. "I don't feel like myself because I'm grieving, because my house burned, because I'm stressed." Dr. Walsh nodded sympathetically, but his eyes were cold. "Denial is very common in these cases, Mrs. Patterson. I'm going to prescribe some medication to help manage your symptoms." The medication made everything worse. Within days, I could barely think straight. I felt like I was moving through thick fog. Simple tasks became confusing. What I didn't know then was that Dr. Walsh was Crystal's former colleague from her days working as a pharmaceutical sales representative. He was deep in debt from gambling, and Crystal was paying him to falsify my diagnosis and prescribe medications that would actually worsen my cognitive function. One night, about a week into staying at their house, I woke at 3 a.m. I heard voices downstairs. Moving carefully, I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Crystal's voice carried up clearly. The pills are working perfectly. Another week, and Walsh will declare her incompetent. Then we can move forward with the guardianship. Another woman's voice. One I didn't recognize. What if someone finds out? That was Crystal's sister, Bethany. I would learn her name later. Crystal laughed softly. Who? Everyone thinks she's losing it. The fire just moved up our timeline. This is actually working better than I planned. I tried to pull out my phone to record the conversation, but my phone was dead. I realized then that Crystal had been draining my battery every night while I slept. I had no way to capture evidence. The next morning, I stopped taking the medication Crystal gave me. I would pretend to swallow the pills, then spit them out later when I was alone. After 2 days, my mind started to clear a bit. But Crystal noticed. I found the pills in the bathroom trash where I had hidden them. That evening, she started crushing the medication into my food instead. I realized it when I noticed a bitter taste in my dinner. But by then, I had already eaten half the meal. I was trapped. I had no car because mine had been at my house during the fire and needed repairs from smoke damage. I had no accessible money. Thomas watched me constantly, thinking he was being helpful and protective. Crystal controlled every aspect of my environment. Then Dr. Walsh recommended a competency evaluation. Crystal filed paperwork for guardianship. I overheard her on the phone making arrangements. Attorney Patricia Hammond finally managed to reach me on Thomas's landline one afternoon. Arabella, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. There's something important about the will you need to know. But Crystal walked into the room and took the phone from my hand. She's resting right now. I'll have her call you back. She hung up without giving me Patricia's message. I later learned that Patricia was trying to tell me about additional documentation Harold had left, but Crystal made sure that message never reached me. The competency hearing was scheduled 10 days out. I knew if I was declared incompetent, Crystal would win. The will clause wouldn't protect me, because I would be institutionalized under court order, not against my will. It would be deemed medically necessary. I was running out of time and options. The morning of the competency hearing, I had been secretly avoiding the crushed medication in my food for 3 days. I had been pretending to eat, then disposing of food when Crystal wasn't watching. I felt clearer, but desperately weak from essentially starving myself and from weeks of being poisoned. Crystal came into the guest room where I was getting dressed. Let me help you, Mother. We want you to look your best for the judge. She handed me clothes she had laid out. A blouse, a skirt, sensible shoes. I put them on, my hands shaking. It wasn't until I looked in the mirror that I realized she had given me the blouse inside out, and the shoes didn't match. One was black, one was navy blue. Perfect, Crystal said, pulling out her phone. She took several photos of me. Evidence of cognitive decline, she murmured. I realized too late what she had done. If I changed clothes now, it would look like I couldn't dress myself consistently. If I left them as they were, I would look incompetent to the judge. I changed the blouse and the shoes, but the damage was done. Crystal had photos of me dressed incorrectly. At the courthouse, I tried to speak with the court-appointed attorney, assigned to represent me. He was a young man named David Chen. No, wait, I need to use different names. David Porter. He seemed rushed and distracted, shuffling papers as he asked me brief questions. I tried to explain about Crystal's plot, about being poisoned, about everything. His expression shifted from professional interest to poorly concealed skepticism. Mrs. Patterson, these conspiracy theories aren't helping your case. We need to focus on demonstrating that you're competent to manage your affairs. But I could see he had already made up his mind. He thought I was a paranoid old woman. The hearing began in a small courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s, named Judge Barbara Martinez. Crystal's lawyer was a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit named Robert Ashworth. Robert presented his case methodically. He laid out a timeline of my supposed decline. The missed appointments, the canceled phone service, the financial confusion, the fire. Each incident was framed as evidence of my inability to care for myself. Then he played the videos Crystal had recorded. In one, I was walking through Thomas's house, looking disoriented, talking to myself. The context was missing. What the video didn't show was that I was looking for the bathroom in the middle of the night in an unfamiliar house, and I had been muttering about where things were. In another video, I appeared to be arguing with someone who wasn't there. Again, the context was stripped away. I had actually been on the phone, but Crystal had edited out everything except my side of the conversation. Dr. Walsh took the stand and testified under oath. He presented his fabricated medical records, his false test results. He spoke about progressive cognitive impairment, about my inability to manage my own affairs safely. Then Thomas testified. My son sat in the witness chair, and I saw tears running down his face. I love my mother so much, but I'm scared for her. She's not safe alone. She thinks Crystal is plotting against her, but Crystal has been nothing but loving and helpful. Mom needs care that we can't provide at home. Watching my son testify against me was one of the hardest moments of my life. This was my child, the boy I had raised, and he truly believed he was protecting me. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand on shaky legs. Robert questioned me first. He asked about the incidents, and I tried to explain that they had been manufactured. Then I brought up what I had overheard at the funeral. I heard Crystal on her phone the day of my husband's funeral. She said she was going to speed up the inheritance and put me in a nursing home. Robert pounced. You claim you remember this conversation from 2 months ago perfectly, with exact quotes, but you can't remember doctor's appointments or phone calls you supposedly made last week? I tried to explain the difference. That one conversation was traumatic, burned into my memory. The other things never happened. I brought up Harold's will clause. My husband added a protective clause because he suspected Crystal. Robert smiled. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, let me address that clause. He pulled out legal documents. The clause states that if you are institutionalized against your will or without medical necessity, the inheritance is affected. However, if you are declared incompetent by this court, you're not being institutionalized against your will. You're being protected through legal guardianship. And Dr. Walsh has established medical necessity. The clause doesn't apply in this situation. I felt my world collapse. The protection Harold tried to give me had a loophole, and Crystal had found it. The stress of that realization, combined with weeks of medication poisoning, caused my blood pressure to spike. I became dizzy on the witness stand. The courtroom seemed to tilt. I reached for the glass of water on the stand and knocked it over. Water spilled across the wooden surface. I tried to stand, and my legs buckled. The bailiff rushed forward and caught me before I hit the ground. Your Honor, this is exactly what we've been talking about, Crystal's voice rang out. Judge Martinez looked concerned. This hearing is adjourned. Mrs. Patterson needs medical evaluation. We'll reconvene after she's been examined by medical professionals. An ambulance was called. I was taken to the emergency room while Crystal probably smiled in triumph. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor ran blood tests. A young woman named Dr. Jennifer Morrison examined me. What medications are you currently taking, Mrs. Patterson? I tried to explain about being poisoned, but I was listed in the system as potentially incompetent. Dr. Morrison made notes in my chart about unusual medication levels in my blood, but hospital procedure required her to notify my current caregiver. Thomas was called. He arrived with Crystal. Dr. Morrison showed them the results, indicating elevated levels of various medications in my system. Crystal jumped in immediately with her explanation. She gets confused and takes her pills multiple times. She forgets she already took them. We've tried to monitor her, but she gets angry when we supervise her medication. Dr. Morrison looked at me with sympathy, but believed Crystal. She released me to Thomas and Crystal's care with recommendations for better medication management. Back at Thomas's house, everything was worse than before. Crystal dropped any pretense when Thomas went to work. She locked me in the guest room. "You almost ruined everything in court with that will clause nonsense," she said through the locked door. "Lucky for me, lawyers are smarter than confused old women. The hearing reconvenes in 1 week. This time, they'll have the medical evidence from the emergency room to use against you." I was now a prisoner in my own son's house. The competency hearing would resume, and this time Crystal had even more ammunition against me. 5 days until the final competency hearing. I sat in the locked guest room, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks because I was refusing to eat most of the food Crystal brought me. I was getting dangerously thin and weak, but my thoughts were finally my own again. Crystal brought 3 meals a day, all heavily medicated. I would pretend to eat, then hide the food in napkins and dispose of it in the bathroom trash, which I would empty myself into the toilet when she finally let me out for my monitored bathroom breaks. It was a desperate strategy, but it was all I had. Thomas worked long hours at his accounting firm. He left at 7 in the morning and rarely came home before 7 at night. He had no idea I was locked in the room all day. Crystal had told him she was keeping the door closed so I could rest without being disturbed. On the 3rd day of my imprisonment, I heard Crystal on her phone in the hallway right outside my door. She wasn't trying to be quiet. Maybe she thought I was too medicated to understand or remember what I heard. "How many beds do you have available?" "Good. Arabella will be the 5th this quarter." "Yes, same arrangement as the others. I get 20% of their assets up front. You get your facility fees guaranteed for life. Dr. Walsh gets his cut for the medical documentation." My blood ran cold. 5th this quarter. Crystal had done this before, to other people. This wasn't just about me. It was a scheme, a system she had perfected. She continued. "Once she's declared incompetent, we'll move quickly on the asset liquidation. The house alone is worth $400,000. Even with the clause, there are ways around it. Once I have guardianship, I can argue the house needs to be sold to pay for her care." I pressed my ear harder against the door, desperate to hear everything. The man on the other end must have asked a question, because Crystal laughed. "No, Thomas has no idea. He's so busy playing the devoted son, racked with guilt over Mom's condition. It's actually perfect. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him." That afternoon, I knew I had to act. Crystal had left for what she said would be a 2-hour appointment. She told Thomas, who was working from home that day, that he needed to watch me. Thomas had a conference call scheduled. I called through the door that I needed to use the bathroom. He was distracted, nodded, unlocked the door. "I'll be right outside," he said, then returned to his home office for his call. Instead of going to the bathroom, I moved as quietly as I could to Crystal's home office. My hands shook as I opened the door. The room was neat, organized, with a large desk and filing cabinets. I had maybe 15 minutes before Thomas checked on me. I started searching through the desk drawers. Nothing in the first 2 drawers except regular office supplies. The 3rd drawer was locked. I looked around desperately and found a letter opener. I had never picked a lock before, but desperation made me bold. I jimmied the letter opener into the lock, wiggling it frantically. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably 90 seconds, the lock clicked open. Inside was a file folder labeled LP, in neat handwriting, Legacy Planning. I pulled it out with shaking hands and opened it. What I saw made me feel sick. There were documents for 4 other elderly people. Dorothy Marshall, 73 years old. Frank Sullivan, 68. Agnes Porter, 75. Harold Peterson, 81. Each had a complete file with medical records, financial documents, signed powers of attorney, and notes in Crystal's handwriting detailing assets and how they were being liquidated. All 4 were listed as current residents of Shady Pines Nursing Home. I pulled out my phone, which Crystal had finally returned to me the day before, probably thinking I was too medicated to use it effectively. I started taking photos of every document in the folder. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Crystal's voice calling out, Thomas, I'm back early. Panic flooded through me. I shoved the folder back into the drawer, but in my haste, some papers fell out. I was scrambling to pick them up when Crystal walked into her office. For a moment, we both froze. Then her face twisted with rage. She lunged forward and grabbed the papers from my hand. I tried to hold on to them, but she was younger and stronger. We struggled briefly before she wrenched them away from me. Thomas came running. He appeared in the doorway just as Crystal pushed me back. I stumbled against the desk. She broke into my office, Crystal said, her voice shaking with what sounded like fear but I knew was anger. She's going through my private things. Thomas, I said desperately, she has files. Other victims. She's been stealing from elderly people. This isn't just about me. What files? Thomas looked around the office. What are you talking about? During our struggle, Crystal had somehow hidden the folder. I realized she must have shoved it behind her or into a drawer. I looked around wildly, but there was no evidence visible anymore. The files with the other people. Dorothy, Frank, Agnes, Harold. She has a whole system. Crystal started crying. I don't know what she's talking about. Thomas, look around. There's nothing here. She's completely paranoid now. Thomas pulled me gently but firmly out of the office. Mom, you can't go through Crystal's things. This isn't okay. But I saw them. The files, the evidence. He looked at me with such sadness. Mom, there's nothing there. As he led me back to the guest room, I looked over my shoulder. Crystal was standing in her office doorway, and she was smiling. That evening, things got worse. Crystal started crying at dinner, and Thomas asked her what was wrong. I didn't want to tell you like this, she said, her voice breaking. Not with everything happening with your mother. Tell me what? I'm pregnant, Thomas. 8 weeks. I was going to wait until things were more settled to tell you. I watched my son's face transform. Joy, shock, concern, all flickered across his features. That's incredible. That's wonderful. He pulled his wife into his arms, and she cried on his shoulder while making eye contact with me over his back. Her eyes were cold and victorious. She's lying, I said. This is manipulation. Mom, stop, Thomas said firmly. Please, I can't take any more. The pregnancy announcement changed everything. Thomas was now even more protective of Crystal, even more convinced that I was the problem. He saw his pregnant wife being attacked by his mentally ill mother. That night, I heard Crystal on the phone again. She was talking to Dr. Walsh. Shady Pines has a bed available tomorrow. Emergency admission based on violent episode today. Get the paperwork ready. We're not waiting for the competency hearing. I realized I had less than 24 hours before I would be institutionalized. The competency hearing was in 4 days, but Crystal wasn't going to wait anymore. She was going to have me committed as a danger to myself and others based on today's incident in her office. At midnight, I made my decision. I had to escape. Using a hairpin I had hidden in my pocket, I picked the lock on the guest room door. It was a simple interior lock, much easier than the desk had been. The door opened silently. I crept downstairs in my nightgown and bare feet. The house was dark and quiet. I made it to the front hallway and reached for the telephone on the side table. I would call the police, tell them everything, beg them to investigate. But the moment I picked up the phone, the house alarm system went off. The shrieking siren filled the house. Lights came on upstairs. I ran for the front door, but it was dead-bolted, and I didn't have the key. Thomas and Crystal came running down the stairs. Mom, what are you doing? Thomas grabbed my arm as I struggled with the door. Crystal was already on her phone with the police. Yes, my mother-in-law has dementia, and she's trying to leave the house in her nightgown. She's confused and could hurt herself. Please send someone. Within minutes, police cars were in the driveway, lights flashing. 2 officers came to the door. They saw an elderly woman in a nightgown, looking wild and disheveled. They saw a concerned young couple trying to care for her. I tried to tell them about Crystal's scheme, about the files, about everything. But my words came out jumbled and frantic. I sounded exactly like what Crystal claimed I was, a paranoid, confused old woman. The officers recommended an emergency psychiatric evaluation. Crystal called Dr. Walsh, who arrived at the house at 3 in the morning. I later realized how suspicious that timing was. What doctor makes house calls at 3 in the morning, unless they're part of the scheme? Dr. Walsh evaluated me right there in the living room, while I sat on the couch, with Thomas holding my hand, telling me it would be okay. Paranoid delusions, attempt to flee in an unsafe mental state, danger to herself. Emergency sedation is necessary. He pulled a syringe from his medical bag. I tried to fight, but Thomas and one of the police officers held me still. I felt the needle pierce my arm. "No," I tried to say. "Please, Thomas. Please believe me. It's okay, Mom. We're going to get you help. You're going to be safe." The medication hit me fast. The room started spinning, everything going fuzzy and dark at the edges. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was Crystal's voice. "Shady Pines will pick her up at 9 tomorrow morning. Everything is arranged." I woke up in a room I didn't recognize. Pale morning light filtered through curtains I had never seen before. The bed was narrow and institutional, with metal railings. The walls were beige. Everything smelled like antiseptic and old laundry. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, or how I got there. Then it all came flooding back. The escape attempt, the police, Dr. Walsh's injection. Crystal's voice saying, "Shady Pines would pick me up." I was in the nursing home. She had won. A nurse came in. A woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. Her name tag read, Margaret. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. How are you feeling?" "Where am I?" "You're at Shady Pines Care Facility. You were admitted yesterday for your safety and care. I'm Nurse Margaret. I'll be looking after you today." I tried to sit up, but I was still groggy from whatever Dr. Walsh had injected me with. The room spun a little. "I need to leave. I need to call my attorney." Margaret's smile was sympathetic but firm. "Let's take things slow. Dr. Walsh will be by later to check on you. For now, why don't I get you some breakfast?" She left before I could protest. I looked around the room more carefully. It was small, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet. There was a narrow bed, a small dresser, one chair, and a window with a lock on it that I couldn't reach even if I could get out of bed. The door had a handle that only opened from the outside. I was in a locked facility, a prisoner. After I had eaten a little of the breakfast Margaret brought, which I was terrified might be medicated, but was too hungry to refuse entirely, she helped me into a wheelchair and took me to the common room. The common room was large and bright, with several sitting areas, a television, and windows overlooking a courtyard. There were maybe 20 other residents, most of them significantly older than me, many in wheelchairs, or sitting quietly with blank expressions. Margaret wheeled me to a corner near the window and then left to attend to another resident. I sat there, trying to think through the fog in my brain. Then I heard a voice. "Excuse me, dear. Do I know you?" I turned to see an elderly woman in the chair next to mine. She had white hair and bright blue eyes that looked more alert than most of the other residents. "I don't think so," I said. "I'm Dorothy Marshall. I've been here about 6 months now." Dorothy, the name from Crystal's files. I felt my heart start beating faster. "How did you end up here, Dorothy?" Dorothy's face clouded. "My stepdaughter said I needed care. Everything happened so fast. One day, I was living in my own home. The next I was here. She took over all my finances, said she was protecting me. Do you remember your stepdaughter's name?" "Crystal. Her name is Crystal." My breath caught. "It's the same Crystal. She did this to me too." Dorothy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are others here. Frank and Agnes. We've compared stories. All of us had the same thing happen. Financial confusion, missed appointments. Then suddenly we were declared incompetent and brought here. Where are Frank and Agnes now?" Dorothy pointed across the room. Frank Sullivan was a thin man with wispy gray hair, sitting in a wheelchair and staring at nothing. Agnes Porter was a tiny woman asleep in a recliner. They're heavily medicated, Dorothy said sadly. More than me. I've been pretending to take my pills but hiding them. It's the only reason I can think clearly enough to talk to you. I need to get out of here. I need to stop Crystal before she hurts anyone else. Dorothy touched my hand. How? We're locked in. No one believes us. Our families think we're confused. She was right. But then I remembered. Back in the room, I had to check. After Margaret brought me back, I asked to have my personal belongings. Margaret brought a small bag with my toiletries and one change of clothes. I went through everything carefully. Shampoo, toothbrush, my small makeup bag. I opened the makeup bag with trembling fingers. Inside, beneath the compact and lipstick, I felt something hard in the lining. I tore the fabric carefully. A small safety deposit box key fell into my palm. There was a tiny tag attached with Harold's handwriting. First National Bank, Box 237. When you need the truth, Harold. My dear Harold had left me something. Evidence. He had known. He had tried to protect me, even after death. I clutched the key, feeling the first spark of hope I had felt in weeks. That afternoon, Crystal arrived. She walked into the common room with her designer purse and perfect hair, accompanied by a heavy-set man in an expensive suit. This was Ronald Pierce, the administrator of Shady Pines. Though I didn't know his name yet, Crystal spotted me and walked over, all false concern. "How are you settling in, Mother Arabella?" Ronald Pierce set up a small table, and Crystal opened her briefcase. She pulled out papers and spread them in front of me. "Just a few documents that need your signature. Standard paperwork for your care here." I looked at the papers. Power of attorney, property deed, transfer, bank account authorizations. She was trying to get everything Harold had protected. "I won't sign anything." Crystal leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "You're being declared incompetent in 48 hours. The emergency evaluation process is already in motion. Either you sign now and maintain some dignity, or I get everything anyway through the court, and you spend the rest of your life in this place. Your choice." I looked around the room. Dorothy was watching. Frank and Agnes sat in their medicated haze. I thought about the key hidden in my pocket. I made my decision. I stood up from my chair, stronger than I had let anyone see me be in days. "I won't sign," I said loudly, my voice carrying across the common room. "I won't sign because you're a thief and a fraud." Crystal's eyes widened. "Mother, you're confused." "I'm not confused," I said even louder. "You've been poisoning me. You and Dr. Walsh and this administrator are running a scheme. You're stealing from elderly people." Other residents were looking now. Staff members were starting to gather. Crystal tried to grab my arm, but I shoved the papers off the table. They scattered across the floor. "Call the police," I shouted. "She's been institutionalizing people illegally and stealing their assets. There are files, there's evidence." Crystal's face flushed with anger. She dropped the concerned act. "Thomas was right. You're completely unstable." Ronald Pierce called for security. 2 large orderlies who started walking toward me. But another woman in a white coat stepped into the room. She was younger, maybe in her early 40s, with dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Rachel Morrison, medical director. "What's going on here?" she asked. Ronald Pierce jumped in. "One of our patients is having an episode. We have it under control." Dr. Morrison looked at me, really looked at me, in a way no one had in weeks. "What's your name?" "Arabella Patterson." "And I'm not having an episode. I'm telling the truth." Something in my voice, or my eyes, must have convinced her, because she said, "Mr. Pierce, I'll handle this. Please take Mrs. Patterson to a private exam room. I want to evaluate her myself." "But Dr. Walsh has already," Ronald started. "I'm the medical director of this facility," Dr. Morrison said coldly, "and I've been on vacation for 2 weeks. No one told me we had a new admission. I'll evaluate Mrs. Patterson personally." She took me to a private exam room, away from Crystal and Ronald Pierce. She asked me questions, not the condescending ones I had gotten used to, but real questions. She listened to my answers. She looked into my eyes and seemed to see a person, not a confused patient. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to order comprehensive blood work. If what you're telling me is true about being drugged, we'll find evidence. She drew blood herself and sent it to the lab with priority processing. Then she sat with me and said, I want you to tell me everything from the beginning. I told her. All of it. The funeral, Crystal's plot, the poisoning, the isolation, the fake diagnosis, the other victims. Dr. Morrison took notes and didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, Stay in this room. I'm locking the door from the outside for your protection, not to imprison you. I don't want Ronald Pierce or anyone else accessing you until I have your lab results. I'll be back. That evening, Dr. Morrison returned with lab results in her hand. Her face was grim. Mrs. Patterson, you were right. Your blood shows elevated levels of benzodiazepines and anticholinergics. The amounts are far beyond any therapeutic dose. Someone has been systematically poisoning you. I started crying with relief. Someone finally believed me. I'm calling the police and Adult Protective Services right now, Dr. Morrison said. She pulled out her phone, but she paused and looked at me. You mentioned evidence your husband left you? A safety deposit box at First National Bank. I have the key. We need to get you there. That evidence could be crucial for a criminal case. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor was finally working up the courage to do something she should have done weeks ago. She had been feeling guilty ever since she had ignored Arabella's distress. That evening, she drove to Arabella's house to check on things. Attorney Patricia Hammond was there, looking at the house with concern. Patricia had been trying to reach Arabella for weeks and was growing increasingly worried. Eleanor approached her. Are you looking for Arabella Patterson? Patricia turned. Yes. Do you know where she is? I'm her neighbor. I should have spoken up sooner. Eleanor's voice shook. I saw her daughter-in-law here the day of the funeral, going through the house for hours, and I saw smoke the night of the fire, before the fire trucks arrived. I should have said something. Patricia's eyes widened. Where is Arabella now? I heard she was taken to Shady Pines. Her son took her, but I saw her face through the window before they left. She looked terrified. Patricia remembered the will clause, institutionalized against her will. If Crystal had forced Arabella into a nursing home, the clause would activate. I need to get to that facility immediately, Patricia said. The next morning, everything converged. Dr. Morrison had spent the night reviewing files and making calls. She had discovered that 3 other residents, Dorothy, Frank, and Agnes, all had similar patterns of admission and similar financial arrangements with Ronald Pierce and Crystal. Detective Lisa Campbell from the Elder Abuse Unit arrived at Shady Pines with Patricia Hammond. Together with Dr. Morrison, they took me to First National Bank. At the bank, I opened safety deposit box 237 with shaking hands. Inside were folders, a USB drive, photographs, and a thick envelope. Harold had hired a private investigator months before his death. The investigation file was comprehensive. Photographs of Crystal meeting secretly with Dr. Walsh, going back over a year. Financial records showing Crystal had been stealing small amounts from Harold's accounts for months, testing whether he would notice. Recorded conversations where Crystal and Dr. Walsh discussed their affair and their plans. There was a list of previous victims, with detailed documentation. Harold's investigator had uncovered the entire scheme. And there was Harold's handwritten note to me. My dearest Arabella, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I suspected Crystal was poisoning me when I confronted her about the stealing. I got very sick the next day. I tried to protect you with the will clause, but I fear it may not be enough. This evidence is everything I could gather. Use it. Stop her. Protect others. I love you always. Harold. Detective Campbell reviewed everything. This is enough for multiple arrest warrants. Patricia looked at me with tears in her eyes. Arabella, Harold loved you so much. He spent his last weeks building this case. I held Harold's note against my chest. He had tried to save me. Even dying, possibly murdered, he had been thinking of my protection. The arrests happened swiftly. Detective Campbell moved fast once she saw Harold's evidence. Within hours, warrants were issued. Crystal was arrested first. Police went to Thomas and my house. She tried to run when she saw them coming, taking Thomas's car and speeding away. But patrol units were already positioned. She was pulled over within 3 miles and taken into custody. Dr. Stephen Walsh was arrested at his office, where police found additional evidence of the scheme, including files on 15 other potential victims he and Crystal had been evaluating. Ronald Pierce was arrested at Shady Pines, trying to destroy paperwork in his office. Police seized his computers and files before he could delete everything. Crystal's sister Bethany, who had been helping with some of the coordination, was arrested at her apartment. Thomas was at work when the police arrested Crystal. Detective Campbell went to his office personally to inform him. She showed him some of the evidence, the photographs, the recordings, the financial documents. My son's world shattered. He sat at his desk, staring at the proof that his wife had been manipulating him, lying to him, using him as a tool to destroy his own mother. He came to Shady Pines that same afternoon. Dr. Morrison had given me a private room where I was staying voluntarily until I felt strong enough to leave. I was recovering, eating real food without medication in it, and my mind was clearing more each day. Thomas knocked on my door. When I said to come in, he entered slowly. His face was ravaged with guilt and pain. "Mom," he said, and then he started crying. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I was angry. I had every right to be furious with him. He had chosen his wife over me. He had helped imprison me. He had ignored my pleas and believed my abuser. But he was also my son. I could see his devastation was real. "You chose her over me," I said, my voice hard. "You let her lock me up, drug me, steal from me. I thought I was helping you. She made everything seem so real, so logical. She played me perfectly." Thomas wiped his eyes. "That's not an excuse. I should have believed you. I should have questioned more. I failed you as a son." "Yes, you did." He nodded, accepting that. "The pregnancy was a lie too, wasn't it?" Patricia had arrived by then. She confirmed it. There was no pregnancy. Medical records show she was never pregnant. Thomas looked like he might be sick. Everything was a lie. Our whole marriage was probably a lie. Over the next few days, the scope of the scheme became clear. Crystal, Dr. Walsh, and Ronald Pierce had been running this operation for 3 years. They had successfully defrauded 22 elderly people, stealing over $4 million collectively. Dorothy, Frank, Agnes, and Harold Peterson, along with 11 others, were all victims who had been institutionalized at Shady Pines. Another 7 had been institutionalized at different facilities that Ronald Pierce had connections with. The district attorney's office charged all 4 conspirators with multiple felonies: elder abuse, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and for Crystal specifically, murder in Harold's death. Yes, murder. The medical examiner exhumed Harold's body and found evidence of poisoning, arsenic, and other compounds in his tissues. Crystal had killed my husband slowly when he had confronted her about the stealing. The trial was 6 months later. I testified, as did Dorothy and several other victims. The evidence was overwhelming. Harold's investigation files, Dr. Morrison's medical findings, the financial records, the recordings. Crystal showed no remorse. Even in court, she tried to play the victim, claiming she had been manipulated by Dr. Walsh, that she had been coerced. The jury didn't believe her. All 4 were convicted on all counts. Crystal received 45 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 30 years. Dr. Walsh got 30 years. Ronald Pierce got 25 years. Bethany, whose involvement was more limited, received 15 years. Attorney Patricia filed the paperwork to invoke Harold's will clause. Because Crystal had attempted to institutionalize me against my will, and through fraud, the clause activated. Thomas's inheritance was reduced to $1. All Harold's assets came under my complete control. Thomas accepted this without argument. "I deserve that," he told me. "I don't deserve anything, but I couldn't let my son have nothing. Despite everything, he was still my child. I set up a trust fund that would provide for him, not giving him everything at once, but ensuring he would be secure. He had to earn back my trust, but I wouldn't destroy him. I also used a substantial portion of the money to establish a foundation for elder abuse prevention and victim support. It was named the Harold Patterson Foundation for Elder Justice. The other victims had their assets returned. Dorothy got her home back. Frank and Agnes were reunited with their savings. Harold Peterson was able to leave Shady Pines and move in with his daughter, who had been told he wanted to be in the nursing home. All of them were getting therapy, support, and help rebuilding their lives. As for me, my house was fully repaired. I moved back in 6 months after Harold's funeral. Being home felt like breathing again. Thomas visited every week. Our relationship was slowly, carefully rebuilding. He was in therapy, working through how he had been manipulated and why he had been so vulnerable to Crystal's lies. It wasn't a fast process, and there were difficult conversations, but we were making progress. He got divorced immediately, of course. That was the easiest legal proceeding in this whole mess. Eleanor became one of my closest friends. She came by at least twice a week for coffee. We would sit in my kitchen, and she would sometimes apologize again for not speaking up sooner. I forgave her. Fear and manipulation had silenced her, just as they had silenced so many others. Dr. Morrison and I also became friends. She had left Shady Pines after the scandal, but continued working in geriatric medicine. She now volunteered with my foundation, training medical professionals to recognize signs of elder abuse. Patricia Hammond remained my attorney and friend. She told me Harold would be so proud of what I had built from the ashes of his tragedy. I started doing advocacy work, speaking at conferences, and to legislators about elder abuse and the need for better protections. I testified before the state legislature, helping to pass stronger laws around guardianship and financial oversight. One afternoon, almost a year after Harold's funeral, I stood in my kitchen. The same kitchen where I had overheard Crystal's cruel words that had started this nightmare. But it was my space again now. Safe, mine. I thought about Harold. About how his love had protected me even after his death, because he had paid attention, trusted his instincts, and taken action. I wished desperately that he was here to see that his efforts had not been in vain. I thought about the other victims I had helped save. Dorothy was back in her own home, taking painting classes. Frank had reconnected with his grandchildren. Agnes was writing her memoir. I thought about Thomas, slowly finding his way back to being the man I had raised him to be. It would take time, but we would get there. And I thought about myself, Arabella Patterson, 67 years old, who had been broken down, poisoned, imprisoned, and nearly destroyed. But I was still standing. I had fought back and won. More than that, I had turned my trauma into purpose. I was protecting others, changing laws, shining light into dark corners where predators hide. That's real strength. Not the absence of fear, but pushing forward despite it. Not avoiding pain, but transforming it into something meaningful. I learned that trust must be earned, even from family. That isolation is a weapon abusers use, so maintaining connections and community is essential. That speaking your truth matters, even when no one believes you at first. That documentation and evidence can save your life. That you are never too old to fight back. I also learned about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses or forgets, but the kind that releases you from being defined by someone else's cruelty. I forgave Thomas because holding on to that anger would have poisoned me more than Crystal's drugs ever did. But I also maintained boundaries. Forgiveness doesn't mean blind trust. As I stood in my kitchen that afternoon, sun streaming through the window. I smiled. Life had tried to crush me. A person I trusted had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I had lost Harold, been poisoned, gaslit, imprisoned, and nearly lost everything. But I survived. And I made sure that no one else would face what I faced alone. That's my promise. That's my purpose. That's my triumph. If you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse or financial exploitation, please reach out for help. You don't have to face it alone. And to everyone listening, I want to ask you something. Have you ever witnessed something concerning happening to an elderly person in your community, but weren't sure whether to speak up? What stopped you? What would make you more likely to act next time? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you or made you think differently about the vulnerability of our elderly loved ones, please like this video and share it with others. These stories need to be heard. Awareness saves lives. And if you want to hear more stories about real people overcoming impossible odds, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us share these important messages. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was difficult to hear at times, but these difficult truths need to be told. May you always have the courage to speak up when something feels wrong, the strength to stand up for yourself and others, and the wisdom to know that it's never too late to fight back. Take care of yourselves and each other.